everybody hear me good? Any echoes? Awesome. Okay. I made y'all a new PowerPoint from last year. We've had a lot of good discussions. I've been on the road for about a week and a half now. What we've been told and what actually worked. When I first started down this journey, everybody told me, well, if you plant a cover crop, you can completely eliminate fertilizer. That may be true for some, but most of what I've seen, actually, can you click it down just a little? What I've seen on our farm is we can reduce fertilizer 60, 80% on our production acres and still maintain a really good return on investment. And what I mean by that, I can use 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen across most of our acres and see a tremendous yield increase without degrading the soil, over applying nutrients, and that's what we've been working on. So this is where we call home. If you're not familiar, we live in North Carolina. We're located at the base of the mountain, so our West County ground, pretty good slopes on it. We've actually got a few farms that we have to empty the combine. We've tipped the combine up on one set of tires before. If you've never done that, it's really fun. We were spread out actually across 3 counties at our largest point in time, which was 2018. I don't know how it is in Iowa and the rest of the country, but we can't find good farm help. They'll ride in a piece of equipment that drives itself, but the minute they have to get out and pick up a rock or a stick, they don't want to farm anymore. So we're located just in 2 counties now, but this is where we started at. Everybody's seen these massive big cover crops in magazines. You're going to see some of ours today. But how many of you farm, I would say, north of Missouri? Make y'all work a little bit, make sure you're awake. Okay. There's an old saying that I've got that you grow organic matter in the north, we grow biomass in the south. We turn organic material 365 days on our farm. We don't get ground freeze, we don't slow down. We can build tremendous amounts of biomass. But if you're only having a 90, 100, 110 day growing season and you're seeing frost and freeze at that point, you don't have to build cover crops that are 6 and 7 feet tall to see a benefit from them. Just having that live living root, you'll see what we're talking about just like right here. Annual ryegrass, that's a dirty word in most of the country. I like annual ryegrass. Yes, it's tough to kill. We don't plant annual ryegrass as a VNS variety. We always get a certified seed, so we have a really good single canopy cover there that we can terminate. But look at the root mass. I mean, that annual ryegrass was probably 4 to 6 inches tall, and we had roots over 2 feet deep. This is better than just standard no-till without cover crops. This is basic, and this isn't very expensive at all. This is $10 an acre. So you don't have to break the bank on this stuff. This is where we started at. I'm 27 years old. You know, there's no gray, there's actually no beard there. I was still a full-time fireman. But I was so proud of that 4-row planter. How many of you in here are from Iowa? I bought that planter in Iowa back in 2011. I paid like $1,600 for it, and it cost me double than that to ship it to North Carolina. And then I actually ran into a guy named Bob Skillings. They run RE Skillings up in Ohio, and he sold me a boatload of parts. Actually gave me a lot of help and a lot of information on how to build that thing, and that's how we planted our first crop. This is where we're at today. If you're doing no-till, a lot of the times we have issues getting seed depth, maintaining an even depth for emergence. We had a problem in 2015 where we only had 4 inches of rain from March to the end of September. It was extremely dry. And we were throwing suitcase weights on the planter. We were doing everything we could to try to get a crop in the ground. And it was actually, you know, we've talked a lot about the people that Lauren Steinlage has helped. I don't know how he comes up with this stuff, but I called Lauren and I was like, I can't get my corn to go in the ground. And he said, how fast are you driving? And I said, typical, you know, 5 miles an hour, maybe 5.5. And he explains to me how double disc openers are just like the hull of a boat, and the faster you drag them, the more they plane up. And just simply talking to him and slowing down from 5 to 3 miles an hour, we were actually able to maintain depth. In saying that, if you're going to switch to no-till, you're going to see soil changes that aren't going to be like conventional tillage. You may have to plant slower. You may have to change up and actually run a no-till coulter. A lot of people have went away from them. For us to plant our 3-inch depths, we still run coulters and row cleaners. What this picture is meant to show y'all is how much we actually rebuild our planters every year. The most important piece of equipment on our farm as far as cash crops goes is the planter. If your planter's not 100% and you don't put it in the ground at 100%, your crop will never be above what the planter put it in the ground as. One of the big things that we started noticing, any John Deere dealers in here at all? Okay, good. John Deere makes crappy parallel arms. They're just absolutely horrible. Every year we were taking this lower H-beam parallel arm and we were bending at least half, if not 3/4 of them on the planter every single year. We found precision planting solutions and we actually started running theirs, and just this right here has maintained our depth a lot better than what we were getting from our OEM equipment. How many of you ever have done this before on your lower shanks? So how many of you in here do the flag test? Like I said, I'm gonna make sure y'all are awake on me. Anybody do flag test? I'm gonna pick on y'all. How many row planter do you have?
16.
How many rows do you flag?
16.
I shouldn't have started on you. Anybody else doing less than that? We can rewind. When we first heard about the flag test, everybody was like, hey, go flag off one row and see how your emergence is. And that's really good. That's what we did for years. And then somebody said, well, you should be looking at all your rows to making sure that you're having even emergence across all of them. We picked this up the year that we did the flag test on every row. Just that little bend and deflection right there. It actually, from the front to the back, it moved it over about 1.25 inches and it lifted up the back about 1/2 inch. And when we went out there and did ear counts, that one single row was costing us 20 bushels an acre. That's a massive difference in our farm operation when you're talking about losing $5 corn, 20 bushels an acre. That's $100 an acre just because of that. Then we started looking at double disc openers. Everybody was telling us to preload our double disc openers, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. That's what we've all heard. If you're running a 3.5 millimeter or thicker blade, we preload ours anywhere from 2.5 to 3 inches. We want a perfect uniform furrow. If you're actually going to be trying to put these into heavy cover crop, if you're going to be trying to go for depth, you've got to have that uniform furrow. And so we ordered some double disc openers from a manufacturer, and they are really good double disc openers. But if you look right here, there's actually a scratch that's in a half moon shape right here, and that bearing was off by 1/16 of an inch. And every time we would do a quarter revolution, it would throw that compression off anywhere from 1/2 to 3/8 of an inch. That's a yield robber. You know, if you're going into a no-till system and you're trying to get it right the first time and be perfect, that's how we're losing yield. We also went to a different style gauge wheel. We bought some of the Polyflex from Exacta Solutions, and those will probably last me at least another 10, 15 years. They've actually worked out really good for us. We also went to the Keaton seed firmers. I used to hear farmers tell me all the time, hey, if you're running a Keaton seed firmer, sometimes it drags the seed. What we have found out is you're not running enough pressure if you're dragging seed. The only kind of substitute to that is we also farm in South Georgia, and where we've got sandy land, like real like sugar sand, you can see some issues with drags, but when we're in our clay sands, we're probably wearing these Keatons out at least every season, if not a season and a half. And when you're getting dry, you got to crank the pressure up, don't crank the pressure down. You want uniformity in the furrow. And then we used to roll our cover crops before we planted, and that's a really good story. Kind of like Darren showed the pictures, we had a cultipacker. We would go spray our cover crop with Gramoxone, roll it with a cover crop, and then we would plant into it. So my dad works at a furniture factory, and I asked him if he could help me roll cover crops one day and catch up. He said, absolutely. Highway 321 runs north and south right beside of this field. And I said, just roll them north and south. That's all you got to do. Well, my north and south and what the highway is by GPS and his are off by about 10 degrees. And when I went back to go plant into it, we made beautiful round bells from one end of the field to the other. So you've really got to match up what your rolling width is to your planting width, or you could have some issues. And that used to take a lot of time, so now we've went to these planter mounted rollers instead of doing this. This is how we used to roll about 700 acres of cover crops a year. If you've never had a nosebleed last for an entire day, you can get an old Ford tractor like this and roll rye that's about 6 feet tall, and it'll happen, I guarantee it. This is where we're at now. We're rolling green, we're getting maximum biomass. A good part of that is how many people have had an issue with cover crops taking too much moisture out. Did we hear about that a lot this year? You heard that, that was about every different publication or ag website that you could go to talked about farmers in the Midwest had a dry spring, cover crops used all the moisture out, and their crops didn't come up. If you're seeing dry conditions and you know that that cover crop is using a lot of moisture, put a quart of Gramoxone in the sprayer and go kill it as fast as you can. Conserve that moisture. We've had 2 years out of the last 8 years that we had to spray our cover crops ahead of planting because about the middle of March the rain shut off, and we know that that rye at that stage is using anywhere from a quarter to a half inch of moisture a day. And if you're going to use that much moisture, you've got to go out there and make the decision to kill it ahead of planting. Green is good, but it's not always the same every year. This is a picture of what we look like this year, just to give you an idea of what it looks like when we're out there planting. Sometimes we plant really thick, sometimes we plant thinner. Understand, how many of you, I'll make a point here real quick. How many of you have ever had corn that somebody told you had the alleliopathic effect planted behind rye? Man, y'all are scared since I started calling on y'all. Did the corn crop come up? Do you know? So here's what I'm going to tell you. If somebody says I planted corn in the green cereal rye and it was stunted because it was the alleliopathic effect, if that corn germinated and came up, it wasn't alleliopathic. That's how you tell. If you plant corn in a green cereal rye and the seed doesn't germinate and it stays in the ground, that's the alleliopathic effect. If the corn came up and it was yellow and ugly and spindly, your carbon to nitrogen ratio was off. You used up all the nitrogen that was available to that plant and you stunted it because it didn't have enough nutrients. That's what happens. It's a huge misconception amongst farmers. So this is what, we're planting with now. We run a 2x2. We run in furrow on our planter because we are pushing for those higher carbon to nitrogen ratios. A lot of the stuff that we're doing on the farm this year, we started working with Top Crop TV. If you've never heard about it before, it was Corn Warriors and Podfather mixed together. And now it's called Top Crop. You can download the Top Crop app, and you can actually see a lot of the content that we're doing on our farm throughout the whole entire growing season. Anything from agronomy, planter setup, even some of our harvest data, that'll be on the show as well, and some of our plots. Ray had some pretty pictures, so I put one up. So the little girl is saying, I love watching ladybugs. They're so calm and peaceful. And the ladybug is ripping an aphid in half saying, die aphid scum. So we drilled a little bit with one of our loader tractors, and the amount of ladybugs, there had to be thousands and thousands of ladybugs that were living in our cover crop residue. Do we have insect problems just like everybody else? Yes. But my little girl, Emma, I say little, she's 10 now, she won't go pick beans with me anymore after I've already opened the field up, because the next day it's just one sea of spider webs that runs one end to the other, and she doesn't like spiders. We see ladybugs living in our cover crop residue at planting time, and you'll see a few of the insects in here that we would consider predators, but I bet you there's 500 ladybugs to one predator, and they're going to town, absolutely just decimating them. We see ladybugs all the way through the season on our corn now. Do we use insecticides? If we have to. I think you hear so many speakers get up here and they talk about, well, if you use an insecticide, you're going to completely, wipe the system and reset it. Does it hurt it? Absolutely. But the difference between me making a crop and losing a crop and spraying a bifenthrin pass once every 8 or 9 years, I'm going to choose to save my crop, and we're going to work even harder to build them back. Talking about a little bit of nutrient management. Cover crop residue. We were always told that we had nutrients in the cover crops, but when I first started farming, we really didn't have a lot of people talking about how do we scientifically prove what's in this cover crop residue. So we go out in our fields and we take a 2 foot by 3 foot sample. We'll replicate this 2 or 3 times across the field so we get a good average. The way we used to do it is we would actually put it on a trailer and dry it. NRCS has a really good publication about you can heat an oven, I think, to 350 degrees, bake it for a certain amount of time. My district conservationist did that, and he almost got divorced because of the smell, so I don't really recommend that way. And then Adam Daugherty, about 6 or 7 years ago, started telling us about carbon to nitrogen ratios. You're going to hear me say that about 100 times on stage today. So where I'm at in Hickory, North Carolina, we have an annual rainfall of about 40 to 45 inches a year. If I want to see maximum nutrient release from the cover crop residue, My carbon and nitrogen ratio needs to be around 40 to 1. Roy, how much rain do y'all get?
Which year?
10 inches on average?
Average, maybe 14.
All right, so Roy's getting 14 in Colorado. If he wants maximum nutrient release from his cover crop, he needs to be at a 14 to 1 or less. That's like that. So if Roy's trying to go for moisture conservation and ground cover, then nutrient management or maximum nutrient release from that cover crop, those are going to be two separate things. And that's why I'm saying you can grow a beautiful, really big cover crop, you can suppress weeds, you can conserve more moisture, you can keep the ground temperatures lower, you can put more carbon in the ground, but you're going to trade that off for something else. And that's what we have to be aware of as farmers. It's one or the other. You can't have everything. This is what our cover crop tests look like now. We take a big old trash bag, stuff it in there, ship it to Regen Ag Lab. We tell them how many square feet that we pulled the sample from so they can tell us what our dry matter in tons are. We look at our carbon to nitrogen ratio. So this one had a 16.7. So on this one right here, if we're at 40 to 1 or less, I'm taking a credit for 80% of the nitrogen, 75% of the P, and 75% of the K. And these micro elements here, we're taking a 75%. Could it be different than that? Absolutely. But that's where our safety line is. We know that we can take that credit at those amounts, and we can actually see a good result from that. And if you look at it, there's 166 pounds of nitrogen and 232 pounds of potassium. That's a boatload of fertilizer that we don't have to put out that year because we can take it scientifically from this. And so if you wanted to know how good the soils were in North Carolina, that's what we start with on the left. It's really good stuff. It's been beat up for about the last 300 or 400 years. Going from there, 4 years later, this is a 18-inch spade sample. And so halfway down, you can already see a change from that bright orange and red, high iron content clay to where we're seeing carbon start to come in that top 8 inches. We're starting to see earthworms come back. Going to 2022, it looks like chocolate cake now. So it took us 10, 11 years for us to see a drastic change in that soil. But we've seen that. We've seen it go from that bright orange and that red to this dark chocolate cake with aggregation. And so if you ever plant a cover crop, Ray Archuleta will sprout out of it in the springtime. Man, most of y'all are asleep on me today. Ray called me about David Montgomery's new book, and they were doing, I believe it was 14 farms across the U.S., and they wanted to set baselines, and they wanted to look at regenerative farms versus their neighbors' conventional farms. And so this little ring right here, this is our water infiltration. The first water infiltration that we had on that farm was back in 2013. It was about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch an hour. When Ray came out that spring in April, we were like 14 to 16 inches an hour. So we've increased our water infiltration rates from that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch all the way up to that 14 to 16. We started doing earthworm counts. Our earthworm counts were 93 earthworms per square foot. That's 3.3 million earthworms in the top acre foot. To give you an idea, I finally looked up the actual data on it from the university. Per million earthworms can consume and turn over 20 to 40 tons of soil a year in the top 6 inches. So that means that we're moving anywhere from 60 to 120 tons of soil in the top 6 inches with our earthworm counts where they're currently at. The big thing for us is this is where we started in 2012. We had a bunch of data. We started to learn how to sort it and arrange it. Down here is where we're at and learning new things every year, but it's only as good as you can understand it. So I hope y'all are ready for this one. This is the most controversial thing I've ever done on my farm. We wanted to look at the Millick 3 versus the Haney test. We put it on social media, and when I tell you the haters came out, the haters came out. There was so much junk talked over this plot right here, and I'll just say that if you talk junk to us and we beat you by the end of the year, I'm going to call your name out publicly. So just be warned about that. So the green is the Haney test, the yellow is the Millick 3, Haney, Millick 3, and then down here was the Haney test with our farm program, with doing our foliars, doing our biologicals, and farming the way that I farm. These are 5 acre plots. I don't like university plots that are 20 feet wide and 50 feet long. That doesn't take into a bunch of the field variations that we see on our farm, so we do them in 5-acre blocks. Right out of the gate, this is the Haney test and the Millick 3 plants. Haney test on the right, Millick 3 on the left. Oh no, that one got messed up somehow. How many of you have ever been told in here if you plant a legume cover crop before soybeans that they won't nodulate? Anybody been told that? It doesn't. Planting legumes before a soybean crop does not stop nodulation on your beans. Can you have some issues with some pathogens and some of the green bridging? It depends on where you're at. It depends on your crop rotation. Soybeans at their best are going to produce 300 pounds of nitrogen. Any college kids or recently graduated college kids in here? How much? Okay, Ted, I'm going to pick on you. You shouldn't have said up front. How much nitrogen does it take for a bushel of beans?
60.
6.
Is it 60
6.
or 40?
It's 6. It takes 6 pounds of nitrogen to make 1 bushel of beans. So if a soybean plant can only make 300, that means that it can only make enough for 50 bushels. Well, if you're trying to go over 50 bushels, it has to have nitrogen from somewhere else. You have to apply it, you have to build it, organic matter breakdown, soil biology can release some of it, but you're not going to get over 50 bushels just with the soybean nodulation by itself. And this was just a picture to show you that we had vetch, winter peas, and crimson clover before these beans, and they still nodulated very well. So here you go, Willie. We'll start the video for you. You like that, don't you? I said I'd call people out by name. So right now I'm standing in the Millick 3 plot. And down here on this little ridge, you've got where the Haney starts again. But can any of you tell a difference right there? Yep, right there where my finger just pointed. That's the Haney. That's the first 5 acres of Haney right up there. And I said, here you go, Willie. And there's our Haney test. Then we got this 5 acres right here full of Millick that looks like junk. And then Haney starts back again. Those are 60 inches apart. Like when we did these plots and replicated them over the field, we had 60 inches in between our plots, so we had alleyways to walk back and forth and pull tissue samples and do all our stuff during the growing season. And then some weirdo showed up at the farm. We try to take care of the homeless. And we gave him a job to do. And so everybody couldn't say that I was biased. I said, hey, walk out there in the field and pull 2 random plants. So he walked a couple rows in on the Millick. He walked a couple rows in on the Haney, randomly pulled some plants. The Haney test is on your right, and the Millick 3 is on the left. And this is right before harvest. This was in September. So here's the hard numbers. We sold most of our beans this year. We have a terrible basis where I'm at for $12.85. The Millick 3 plot had 22 pounds of nitrogen. It had 60 pounds of phosphorus, 60 K, 9 sulfur, and a 1/4 pound of boron. So that's MAP, AMS, potash, and granulobor. It made 37.56 bushels to the acre, which is pretty darn close to what our county average is. 60 inches away, replicated twice, remember, the Haney plot had 21 nitrogen, 70 phosphorus, 30 potassium, 7 sulfur, and a 1/2 pound of boron. And then you can see your MAP, AMS, and potash and granulobor. Now, what all the haters were saying is, oh, well, the Haney test, that should call for less fertilizer. And they said it couldn't be a good test if it didn't call for less fertilizer. The Haney test, 90% of the time, does call for less nitrogen because it's one of the only tests that looks at ammonium, nitrate, and organic nitrogen and gives us a credit for what's already in the soil. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to call for less P and less K. Now, although we called for 10 more pounds of phosphorus, we called for 30 pounds less potassium. And our fertilizer reduction, we actually reduced by 47 pounds to the acre. That was our reduction from the Millick 3 to the Haney. The Haney test yielded 52.47 bushels. That's a difference of about 15 bushels. It cost us $11 more an acre for the extra phosphorus on the Haney side, because it is our most expensive nutrient to buy. And looking at ROI, the Haney test made us $180.12 more per acre net profit. Anybody would rather have that over Milic 3? Then we look at what we were doing with our foliar program. We had the Haney test. Our first pass was at V4. We sprayed soy sauce, Sweet Success, cow bore, in-soil algae, and 2 ounces of molly. And our PGR, we came back at R3, hit it with 32 ounces of soy sauce, our Wind Sweet Soil, cow bore, in-soil algae, molly, and a PGR again. It made 86.43 bushels in the same field. We spent roughly 70, 80 bucks and gained another 30 bushels. So if you look at return on investment, the farm package, that complete package on the side of your screen over Milic 3 made an additional $558 an acre net. That's profit in your pocket. And if y'all have questions, feel free to ask. So what did our beans look like most of the season? This is what some of our beans look like. We try to maximize on branching, keeping nodes short, and stacking on as many pods as we can. This is just a picture showing where we're stacking our nodes. We're keeping them about 3/4 of an inch to an inch long, which is maximizing our pod set for grain fill. This one was taken on July the 19th. This was around August the 1st. We had 51 nodes on the field average at R1 on that field. And then we went back on August the 19th. So this is the one that was on July the 19th, and this is a month later of what we were seeing out of those plants. That's huge for us. If anybody's growing better beans than that, I'll talk to you after we get done. I need to learn some more. Talking about nutrient management in beans. Anybody want to earn a bottle of bourbon? Come on now. Man, y'all were really asleep. Nobody wants to get a bottle of bourbon? Tom Cotter got one already. All right, Rayanne. We'll see how smart you are. This could turn out bad for you. What's the most needed nutrient for beans after R4? Don't look at the screen. Look at me. No, let me see them eyes.
It's either potassium, boron, or sulfur.
Oh, this is a good try. Sulfur second. It's zinc. How many of you in this room have ever been told that the most needed nutrient in a soybean plant after R4 is zinc? Anybody ever heard that before? I hadn't from any university. Zinc is a chemical signal to that plant to take nutrients out of the plant and put it into the soybean. If you're deficient on sulfur from R4 to R6, you'll see small seed size. That's one of the reasons we don't see nutrients move from the plant. Right here it is up top. 35% of the plant's total zinc uptake is from R4 to R6. But nobody's paying attention to that. It's what we were told versus what actually works. That zinc sulfate pass that we made on our acres this year cost us $4 an acre. This is what it turned out like. For our beans, we did deep injection. We started playing around with some Yetter coulters we had laying around. Now we're running these 20-inch coulters. They're 2996s. We run them 3 inches on each side of the row. On soybeans, we're deep injecting our fertilizer 4 to 6 inches deep. On corn, we're going anywhere from 6 to 10 inches deep. If we can get it down to 10, we'll bury it to the hub. This is how our beans turned out. With just our planter fertilizer, we were at 2,841 seeds a pound. That's pretty average of what you're going to see over the U.S. Where we did the deep injection and we placed nutrients deeper, and it depends on your area. We run soil probes in the ground that tell us our moisture changes throughout the growing season. And in the top 4 inches, I'm going to lose 70 to 80% of my moisture in the top 4 inches by the end of June. Which means if we don't have moisture, we can't pull the nutrients out of the soil and into the plant. So we started looking at going deeper and injecting it. And when we're doing the deep injection, we're at 1,736 seeds per pound. Now, to me, that's pretty awesome. But then you add our foliar program on top of it, and these are not pinto beans. That's actually a soybean. But we were at 1,359 seeds per pound on a 5-acre grid. If you want to look at changing your farm and doing small things that don't break the bank and you don't want to spread a bunch of fertility, you can band it, you can cut down on the amount of fertilizer you're using that way, and you can also maximize the return on investment for your farm. This is one of the things here, I'll put it up just for you. That's it, that's part of it. So we've got a program that we've been working on that we can take a tissue sample, send it to the laboratory, and it might say that we are short on calcium. Say right here at R1, we're at 0.91. We need to be at a 1.13 to 1.26. The program says that we need to be on our next R2 stage, we need to be at a 1.0, or we need to be at a 1.07. And instead of taking a fertilizer company's recommendation and over applying a nutrient and putting out 32 or 64 ounces or whatever they call for, it takes into consideration the size of the plant, the growing season, what the deficiency is, and how much we need to change it, and it'll give us a recommendation in ounces. And now we can take and put 2 ounces of this, 3 ounces of that, 4 ounces of that, and we're not over applying fertility, and we're balancing these plants. And like if you look at calcium, we're at a 0.91 and we needed to be at a 1.07. The program told us what to apply and we got to a 1.06. That's as good as I could ask out of it. And it saves us money where we're not over applying these expensive nutrients.
Do you plant all of your beans in 30-inch rows?
I love 30-inch row beans. Lauren's actually the one that talked me into them, so if I ever cuss them, you know who to blame.
Okay.
We used to be on 15s, then we went to 20s. Our best yielding beans for the last 3 years and what our whole farm is now is 30-inch rows. The only issue that we have with 30-inch row beans is if I plant a really early variety that matures and we still have a lot of heat and GDUs in the season, we will see some late season grass start to come up. But if we're planting like a late group 4, early group 5, and we're maximizing to the end of the season before we see canopy drop on those beans, we're not seeing grass issues.
Are you looking at bricks at all on this?
Yeah, I just tried not to go down the 1.0 path today. Yeah, we're doing bricks testing. We're applying sugars, the Sweet Success, the Wind Sweet Soil. Those are both sugar products. We're also using just white table sugar that you can buy from Sam's Club. If you go to Costco or Sam's Club and tell them you want to buy an entire pallet of sugar and you don't own a restaurant, they're going to ask you for your driver's license. And you can tell them till you're blue in the face that you're not going to make moonshine out of it. And when they're loading that sugar on your truck, they'll say, hey, we sell pallets of mason jars too if you happen to need them. That's a true story. Happened to Sam's Club, Hickory, North Carolina. Then I met a guy named Nick Voss from Kansas, and Nick started talking to me about how deep we were planting our corn. I'll be honest and tell the entire room, I've never grown 300 bushel corn at 2 inches deep. It doesn't happen on our farm. It might somewhere else where you have different topsoil, but if we're going for yield and we're pushing ground as we see it change and we see the healthy soil and the biology come back and we know that we can do it, we're going 3.5 inches. This is the first year we actually planted some corn 4 inches deep. And it came up. Now we did lose some stand count on the 4 inches, but you should see the stalks. They were bigger than a 50-cent piece. They were massive. It actually wasn't that fun to pick them because we had to readjust the deck plates. But then we started talking about our fertility programs. I know I talk a lot about fertilizer, but to give you an idea, we're probably applying anywhere from 60 to 70% less fertilizer than our neighbors are, and consistently seeing this stuff in the practices we're doing. But on the left-hand side, this is ran with a 2x2x2 system. So we're running fertility on both sides of the seed row. On the right-hand side, that's an old school single culture 1 2x2. Now, which one of those plants are going to have the best root system to capture the most amount of nutrients and moisture from that soil? It's the one on the left. Is it worth the money to invest in that? Absolutely. It's a really good return on investment, and we're able to cut down on our fertility by banding. This is what it looks like when it comes up. I can't tell you how many times my neighbors have told me that the way we farm would never work. Our state agronomist for corn, Ron Heiniger, called. Is Archuleta in here? You remember when Heiniger called us out on video? You remember that? Me and Archuleta were in Greensboro, and we were talking about the Haney test, and Ron Heiniger, our corn specialist, said on stage, and it's still up on YouTube if you want to watch it, but he said nobody needed an expensive $50 test if you could read a Millic 3. It cost $11. And that the way that I farmed would never yield well and would never be profitable. I was in Maryland when I found out that we set the state yield that year, and I drove almost 11 hours back so that they had to give me that award from Ron Heiniger in that same year. It was a sweet drive. That diesel was cheap. But have we had failures? Absolutely. First year we did cover crops, we had 30 pounds of rye. Had really good success with weed coverage, not seeing a lot of weeds in the field. We had ground coverage. Like most farmers, I said, hey, if 30 pounds is good, 120 pounds are better. And we put 120 pounds of rye out there. It got about this tall. It had a carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 80 to 100 to 1. We didn't see nutrients from it for at least 12 to 18 months, and it cost us 40 bushels in yield. It wasn't the cover crop's fault. It was my fault. If we're having issues, it's probably because we lack the understanding of what's happening in the soil and with the practices that we're doing. We also started looking at balancing our carbon and nitrogen ratios. You heard it again. We're putting humics and fulvics. If we're running liquid nitrogen, every 15 gallons, we're putting in a quart of fulvic. If we're using dry urea at our V6, V8 top dress, we'll coat it with a humic, and then we'll coat it with a safe MBPT, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But when I called the dealer that I bought these products from, and I told her what we were going to do, she was like, don't do that. And if you do, don't tell anybody where you got it from. And she was genuinely scared. I was too. I can tell you right now, you can put a gallon of liquid humate on urea, and it will be liquid within 24 hours. So if you want to ever, put out, liquid urea in some shape or fashion, just put a gallon of humic on it. It'll liquefy it. But we put a quart and a half and then 1 quart of each product. And this is what we learned. I'm not bashing on them. I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way. It's the only one that I truly know how to talk to you about. Nutrien makes a product that's called nitrane. And nitrane is a nitrogen stabilizer. And I will actually admit, what they say it does, it stabilizes nitrogen. It works. And it's a DCD, and it's what we were using for years. And when we would apply nitrogen with nitrane, our corn, even though we applied nitrogen, would have a long yellow spell, and then all of a sudden it would green up 2 weeks later and take that nitrogen in, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And Carolyn started explaining to me this, and we started doing our research. A DCD is a bactericide. You put it on the nitrogen or the rainwater carries it in the ground, it kills the bacteria, and who converts nitrogen? Bacteria. So if we kill them, then we don't have to worry about it changing forms. But that's not what I need as a farmer. I need that nitrogen there, so we went to NBPTs or polymers. ESN is a polymer. It's a good product that Nutrien also makes. We use ESN. We use NBPTs. And I was up in Minnesota last week, and I put this up here just for Mark. So what happened, I'm going to tell y'all a story about Minnesota real quick. I'm pretty sure it's like the South. Somebody at the University of Minnesota had what we call a field party. Make a big bonfire, you go out there. They drank a bunch of moonshine. They shot the side of a barn with a shotgun, and they drew a line through it, and they said, hey, our nitrogen calculation is now calibrated. That's what happens. True story. Can't prove me wrong on this one. When I met Rick Haney, I'm over here looking, hey, 300 pounds of nitrogen, that's a pretty big difference right here. And Rick Haney said, you're not too bright, are you, son? You need to look over here. We were always told that it took a pound of nitrogen to make a bushel of corn, or a pound and a quarter, depends on where you're from. But if you look over here at 0, we had 50s, 100s, 150s. There's a 200 at about 20 pounds of nitrogen. So how calibrated is that? Because the one thing that I have found out, and I'm sorry if you're from a university, I'm talking about mine specifically, is there's a difference between farming for money and farming with money. And the university farms with money. And if I farmed like the university did, I'd be bankrupt by now. And so that's why we have to figure it out. So this is the Haney test. If you've never seen one, this is what they look like now when we get them. They used to be on a really cool Excel spreadsheet. All I want you to focus on is this right here. This is the first thing that I look at, soil health. Soil respiration, 414 parts per million. That's pretty good. Organic carbon, that's your WEOC, water extractable organic carbon. It's food for microbes, easiest way to say it. Percent MAC, that's how much of this carbon that you're using. Well, this one's at 229%. Is that good or bad? It's both. It means that my ground is cycling and using all of the available organic carbon that it has at 100%. That's what it means. You're using all of it at 100%. So what happens at 229? At 229, the microbes are going to eat all of this organic carbon, and then they're going to go up here into your savings account, which is your soil organic matter, and they're actually going to start breaking down organic matter. We've had farms that we've seen MAC in the 250s, 300s, and we've seen a 1% drop in organic matter in one season. You can see that happen. And then we look down here at the Haney test. How much nitrogen did we save that we wouldn't have got on the Mullick 3? 69 pounds to the acre. Even on a cheap day, that's $50 an acre, and that test cost us about $1.25 an acre. So spend $1.25, save $50. Pretty easy return on investment. And this is at 0 to 6. This is at 6 to 12, 6.4% organic matter and 61 pounds of nitrogen. So between these two, that's 130 pounds of nitrogen, or roughly $115 an acre in savings on nitrogen when we're planting that corn crop. PLFA, if you've never seen a PLFA, this is actually the first one we ever pulled on the farm. We look at total biomass. This one was at 4324. Fungal to bacteria. If Lance or Rick want to correct me if I'm wrong, if you see fungal to bacteria at 0.20, that's roughly 1 to 1. Is that correct? So at a 0.15, you would be at a 0.75 to 1 ratio on fungal to bacteria on a PLFA. This is where we started at in 13 at 4,300. Back in 2022, we didn't get one for this year yet. We were up to 7,021, so we've almost doubled our total microbial biomass. And these are the different ones that you have here for mycorrhizal, saprophytic, protozoa. Then we started looking at DNA analysis. And we worked with a company called Rise Bio. They're about 30 minutes from our house. We're essentially taking our soil, our seed, and biological products that we're using on our farm, and we're testing it in a laboratory to see if it's going to work on our farm before we actually put it into the field. And this is some of the reports that we get back. We can look at nitrification, denitrification, phosphorus cycling. There's a ton of management information that we can look at and not waste our money. This is kind of the graph when we're looking at our nutrient cycling, what our total scores were. But this is one of the cool things that we did this year. When Seth came out and shot our first episode, we were putting in one of our biological plots. This field had a check strip. It had pivot with nitrogen reduction, pivot with full fertilizer, organics. There is a product, if you haven't seen them, they're called fish shit. I found it cool that we could actually say that on TV. There's in-soil algae, and then another check strip with a product called Soil Revive. The thing that only made me mad about this is I've been doing compost, cover crops, livestock integration, manures. Like, we've been trying to push this ground as hard as we can for the last 7-8 years. And we can still use products in small doses, and we actually saw a benefit, and we didn't have an easy year. Pivot Bio, with the reduction of nitrogen and sulfur, we lost 2 bushels, we gained $19 an acre. Full fertilizer, we gained 8 bushels, lost $38 an acre. Organics, 11.7 bushels to the acre better and $38.50 higher return. Fish shit was at 4.62, $18 net return. In-soil was 2.68, $4.85 net return. And then we had a check strip with the Soil Revive on the other side, and it was 3.27. We had hail, we had floods, we had droughts, we had a really rough season, and to see that these products were still working really gave us I'm actually going to mix a few of these next year and see what we can do if we start mixing some of these products together on some of our other plots. And this is not easy. You know, just this one field added 40 to 45 hours of work for us to do it during planting time, flush the planter out, change the product over, tissue samples in season, yield trials at harvest, and actually pulling real data and making sure we're measuring it. It does add a lot of work, but there's not a university in the world that can do an OVT trial that'll give you better results than what you're doing on your own farm. It's plain and simple. This is where we're missing the mark. A lot of us as corn growers, I've talked about this a lot. I was just up in Minnesota. I asked him if he minded me talking about it. He said not. There's a buddy of mine, Myron Stallings, up there. They've been using different forms of fertilizer, and they're applying them at the wrong time, and they haven't seen huge losses, but they're not seeing the benefit of what they're doing. And this right here is what he's missing. So if we look right here at V6, our potassium is only about 14 pounds, which is 2.3%. And then if we just go over to V10, just a couple weeks later, we're up to 31%. So that means that corn plant from V6 to V10 is going to take up over 28% of its potassium for the entire season. If your soil is not biologically active, working like crazy, and you don't have it out there, you're not going to maximize on that. And then one of the other things we're paying attention to is instead of putting sulfur on in the beginning of the season, this yellow line, the last 2 years we've been taking a drone and we've been aerial applying at R1 AMS over the top. And that's been a really big help for us as well. Best Way Ag, Sam's here. One of the things we've been looking at is fertilizer comparisons. I can't tell you how many times I've traveled the country and I get told that potassium chloride is really cheap compared to potassium thiosulfate or KTS that they're buying granular. Here's what we figured out. It takes 500 pounds of KCl, potassium chloride, to get the same amount of potassium as 100 pounds of KTS. So even if we're paying 40% more and we're cutting back 80%, which one's better for your return on investment on the farm? Which one's better for the ground? Which one's better for the environment? It's the 80% reduction. Rick started talking to me about their high calcium soils in Texas. I think it was all the way back in 2015 and how it ties phosphorus up. And we didn't have a lot of phosphorus availability, and he said, hey, start trying some banding. Banding will help with keeping it from being bound up in the soil profile, and you can also look at reductions. And so over the last 10 years, we're looking at it takes 1,000 pounds of MAP to equal 100 pounds of 1137O in a band. And we're giving up on these crops if you have moisture. If you have moisture and you're stopping your production on corn at R1 with a tissue test and think that you've maximized what that corn crop can do, it's a huge difference going to the later part of the season. Texas Earth is here. The reason that I didn't really get into compost teas is it was so expensive to ship water in a tote halfway across the country from a company that made compost teas. And a CCA in North Carolina, his name's Will Mann, he told me about Texas Earth, and they had this product that essentially we get a 5-gallon bucket, and she'll tell you the correct term, I call it fluff, but essentially the microbes are in the fluff in that 5-gallon bucket, and a 5-gallon bucket will do 40 acres for us. And we're using a compost tea from them now that we can ship economically, and when we're doing compost teas and foliars, anytime between our R3 and R6 from 2019 to 2023, we're seeing a 2-to-1 payment. So for every $1 we're investing from that R3 to R6, we're seeing a $2 return. And that's where we see you're making money in farming. And this isn't a lot of money either. It's not like we're throwing the kitchen sink at it. Total nutrient digestion, if you've never seen a TND before, this is pretty cool. This is a 0 to 6, nitrogen, 2,900 pounds of nitrogen. The big thing for me was potassium. We're typically potassium deficient, 6,100 pounds. In a 6 to 12, we were at 5,500 pounds. So that means in the top acre foot in a TND, I have almost 12,000 pounds of potassium. Do we have a potassium deficiency issue? No, we have a potassium availability issue. And this right here shows what we've got in the ground. And so we did some more experiments, and this is kind of the end coming up. And some of y'all are going to like it, and some of you may hate it. We worked with Rise Bio because I kept hearing for the last 8 years that if I sprayed a chemical that I was going to nuke soil biology and that it was going to die and it was going to take 3 to 5 years for it to come back, that you couldn't use chemistry in farming and still be a good farmer and call yourself regenerative. And so we did this in triple replicated plots, no-till with no chemical, no-till with chemical, disc with chemical, and disc with no chemical. This was a single 2-inch disc pass. So I want y'all to pay attention and just remember 2 inches, single pass. and see how destructive it was. This is what the plot looked like. The tillage is in red, the no-till, I'm partially colorblind, I'm pretty sure that's blue. Is it green? I remember that, I appreciate that, good looking out. Where we had no chemical, our denitrification on the peak was about the same with no chemistry. But I want y'all to look what happened when we tilled the ground and we added chemistry. A massive jump in denitrification. So if you think about it, we had 94 million acres of corn in the U.S. this year. I'd say at least 50% of it was tilled and had chemistry put on it. Pretty safe bet. And we're seeing this amount of nitrogen loss. That's a massive amount. Then we looked at organic nitrogen breakdown. Which one of these had the most organic nitrogen breakdown and fed the crop? So it loses less nitrogen and it also helps produce more nitrogen, whether it was chemical or no chemical in our no-till system. Anytime we disturb the ground, and this is just 2 inches, 1 pass. And then we look at our fungal to bacteria ratio. Look how big the skew is. We saw massive changes in fungal to bacteria ratios where we had tillage versus where we had no-till, whether there were chemicals or not. Then we look at our Haney test. So not only did we want to do metagenomics, we wanted to compare that to what were we seeing on the Haney test and what were we seeing on the PLFA. This is our baseline. It was taken in May. Our CO2 respiration was 227. Where we had no-till and no chemicals, it performed the best. It actually yielded the worst because of weeds. We had no way to manage our weeds in season. So we actually lost about 20 bushels with no-till, no chemicals. So did it make us more money? No. Did the biology thrive? Absolutely. Where we had no-till with chemical, we were at a 286, which is still above our baseline that we set. Disc with no chemical was a 294. So that's pretty close. No-till with chemical, disc with no chemical. Those are relatively close and both above baseline. Anytime we disked and we had chemicals, we were at a 209.85. That's the only one that performed worse and showed less biological activity. PLFA pretty much showed the same thing. Down here, our PLFA was a 4413. No-till, no chemical went substantially up. Disc chemical went down. Disc no chemical was down a little bit, and no-till with chemical was also close to the disc no chemical. Same relationship as we saw above. One thing that I didn't tell you before this is not my chemical program. 90% of our corn acres this year got burned down with 32 ounces of herbicide at planting time. They wanted to know what it would be like if we were doing it with the average farmer. So what this average farmer's program was, a quart of Roundup, a quart and a half atrazine, and a pint of Dual at burn down. We came back at our post spray, we did a quart of Roundup, 5 ounces of Status, and 5 ounces of Callisto. That's a whole bunch of chemistry. Way more than we use, probably 70 or 80% more than we use. And we still saw these results. So if you're a farmer and you have to decide whether you want to disc that ground one time or whether you want to use chemistry to control a weed, which one's going to perform the best? Because it's not the nuclear bomb that I was told 5 or 10 years ago using chemistry. It's a heck of a lot better than disking it up or moving that ground. Am I on time? So this is a project that we've been working on. This is David Brandt's bourbon. Before David passed, we started Farmers Reserve Distillery. If you weren't in the lobby last night to get free samples, y'all missed out. I think everybody enjoyed them. We might have some more tonight. But we started taking David Brandt's corn and we started producing a bourbon out of it called Godfather's Regen Bourbon. I got to go up there to David's Field Day in April, and we actually got to present him with the first box. And the reason I'm bringing that up is our distillery is actually going to be doing a limited release for David Brandt's bourbon. If anybody would want a commemorative bottle, we're going to start taking orders now. It'll come in the wooden box, and part of the proceeds what David wanted to be done was part of it was going to go to a Veterans Foundation and also support people going to soil health conferences, and I think that Jay and Ann's going to continue that. We really haven't nailed it down, but it'll probably be close to that. But that's all I got for you.